Hello everyone, this is the 9th in the series of the FLIMSY 3 weeks, and I want to speak today about meat and wine. For some reason or another, this has taken over the 9 days as the biggest prohibition of the 9 days, and it happens not to be. The Gemara in Tainis says that the only time that we're not allowed to eat meat and wine is Erev Tisha B'Av at the Sudam of Seket, quoting the Gemara, Erev Tisha B'Av lo yochal basar ve'lo yishteh yayin. This year, because it comes out on Shabbos, it's basically irrelevant. From this perspective, everything we do with regard to meat and wine is already in the definition of a minhag, of a custom. As the Shulchan Aruch clearly points out, 3 customs. Some only restricted to the week that Tisha B'Av falls out. Next, some do what we call the 9 days. And some the whole 3 weeks. So, first and foremost, you should know that of all the prohibitions of the 9 days, ultimately, meat and wine happens to be a minhag. Mordechai points that out. That indeed, we have this minhag not to eat meat and drink wine from the beginning of Rosh Chodesh of the 9 days. Why is it that we don't eat meat and drink wine? After all, a regular mourner only has that prohibition when he or she is an one, namely before the burial. But after the burial, they can absolutely drink wine. As a matter of fact, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that's one of the things you should serve at the Sudat Havra'ah, the first meal after the burial. And there's no prohibition to eat meat during Shiva. So why is it that we have this custom? Comes along the Kolbo and says, because ein simcha ela bebasar, that indeed we want to diminish our happiness, mishenichnas av mima'atin besimcha, and therefore, since ein simcha ela bebasar, indeed we get a lot of happiness when we eat a good chunk of meat, as the Rambam says in Hilchos Yantiv, even though the Gemara only talks about wine. Bottom line is, that's the reason why we don't drink wine or eat meat. The Rosh has a different perspective. The Rosh quotes the Gemara in Baba Basra that talks about that after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, there were a bunch of Jews that said, we'll never eat meat, we'll never drink wine. And he asked them why, and they said, because how can we eat meat? There were the Korbanot. How can we drink wine? We used to pour them on the Mizbeach for the Nesachim. So he says, why stop at that? Don't eat bread, after all. One of the Korbanos is called Menachot. They're brought with wheat and with flour. Don't eat bread, and don't drink water, after all. On Sukkot, there was something called Nisuach HaMayim. So he says you can't work that way. Rabbi Yoshua ben Chanina said you have to, of course, mourn for the Churban Beis HaMikdash, but within reason. In his words, Shelo litabel kol ikar i'efshar, litabel yoter midai i'efshar. You can't totally mourn all year, but you can't not mourn at all. And therefore, he comes to the conclusion that basically we have the Zecher LeChorban things all year long. This is what the Rosh quotes in the reference of meat and wine, and therefore the Beit Joseph understood that so why is it that some people don't eat meat and drink wine all the way back from Shiva Asar B'Tammuz? Because this is the time that there was no korbanos on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz Batera Tamid. There was no more korban tamid. This is the time when korbanot no longer were brought normally, and therefore, out of reverence for that and to remember that specifically, we do not eat meat or drink wine. 2 things that were part and parcel of the sacrificial experience. In the words of the Aruch HaShulchan, L'zecher HaKorbanot v'hanesachim shenitbatlu ba'avonotenu. In remembering the korbanot and the nesachim, the pouring of the wine, that unfortunately were canceled because of our sins. So 2 reasons, either because we just want to diminish our happiness, or because specifically it has to do with the sacrificial work. Meat and wine were part and parcel of Beis HaMikdash. We don't have a Beis HaMikdash, we take it out of our menu at home. What's the ramification between these 2 points of view? The answer is going to be, of course, chicken. Chicken, as everybody knows, is not totally meat. We do not eat chicken with milk, but there was an opinion in the Gemara that says you can. In other words, God only said meat and milk. No, not chicken and milk. Well, can you eat chicken during the 9 days? If the reason is en simcha elo bebasar, then maybe you can eat chicken because it doesn't cause you that happiness. And indeed, there was a point of view that said maybe okay. The Mordechai says, Kol zman shehu kishlamim sheyesh bo simcha mishum simcha. In other words, the only thing that you can't eat is something that looks like the Korban Shlomim. The Korban Shlomim was the ultimate way on Yontif to get to Simcha, to eating it within Yerushalayim. So therefore that was real meat and not chicken. But if the reason is not diminishing our joy, but rather to remember the Korbanot that are no longer, then obviously one of the Korbanos was Korban Ha'of. We did bring korbanos out of chickens. So the Mordechai says, Lididan denagini sur basur mirosh chodesh afilu basarov, is out of the question. And indeed, the Beit Yosef paskins at midivrei haMordechai nirash anogim isur mirosh chodesh o mishiva asur b'tamuz b'basar v'yayin afilu basar of or basar maluach v'yayin toses asur. So if the reason is to diminish our happiness, maybe happiness is only with real meat. But if the reason is to remember that there's no longer korbanot, chicken was part of the korbanos, korban ha'of, and therefore it's out of the question, and that's basically the way we paskin. So what is the exception to the rule? First and foremost, Shabbos. The Shulchan Aruch says, Im chal Tisha B'Av v'echad b'Shabbos, or shechal b'Shabbos v'nitchal achar Shabbos, ochel basar v'shotayayin b'sudah mafseket, umaleh Shulchano afilu kesudat shlomo be'eit malchuto. Says the Shulchan Aruch that even at the final meal, Shalosh Shudas before the fast, on the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av this year, you can eat meat. So obviously the whole Shabbos you can eat meat, and this year when we have 2 Shabbos during the 9 days, you can eat meat, drink wine. Normally on Shabbos, just in case the Shulchan Aruch's words are not enough convincing, the Mishnah Berurah indeed says clearly, in other words, even if Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, actually came out on Shabbos, which is not the case this year, Mishnah Berurah says you can eat meat, drink wine normally on Shabbos. What's the second exception to the rule? The second exception to the rule is what we call a Sudat Mitzvah. Namely, the Ramah says, Sudat Mitzvah, Kegon Mila, Pidyon Ben, Siyum Masechet, Ochlim Basar V'Shotin Yain, Kol HaShayachim LaSuda. So, if you make a siyum, or you happen to have a bris or a Pidyon Ben, you can eat meat and drink wine. And I'd like to explain why that is so. Why is Shabbos or Sudat Mitzvah an exception to this rule? Gemara says in Masechet Nedarim that one of the reasons why the Churban Beis HaMikdash happened was she'ein bebarchin b'Torah tchila. They didn't say Birkas HaTorah, which is very hard to understand. It's just a bracha, important bracha, maybe d'oraisa, but just a bracha. So they didn't say Birkas HaTorah in the morning, and that's why God destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. Explains the Batz Shelo asku b'Torah ki im litzorach hadvarim hagashmiyim lahana'atan leidah hadenim litzorach masar matan v'gam leidgod v'larot chochmatam. They learned Torah, but they didn't bless the Torah. Namely, for them, Torah learning was just technical. First of all, to know how to get the most joy out of life. Namely, we won't eat not kosher, but let's eat the best sushi, the best meat, and whatnot. Make sure it doesn't violate halacha. At the same time, in business, let's do everything possible to make money. We won't violate any laws. At the end of the day, the whole Torah became a technical, very, very tangible, technical, gashmi kind of a Torah. They had no intention to using Torah learning to bring more spirituality into the world. And therefore they made a distinction because they didn't want any spirituality in the world. So God left this world, quote unquote, and the whole world was one physical world without any sanctity. And that's what caused the Churban Beis HaMikdash. So, according to the Bach, what basically happened was that they didn't bless the Torah in the sense of they didn't see it as a means to bring spirituality into the world. If that is the case, now you understand why Shabbos and Siyum Masechet and Pidyon Ben and Brit Milah are out of the question, because those are great examples in which we take something physical, a meal, and we connect it to something spiritual, Shabbos, a mitzvah like Pidyon Ben or Brit Milah, and above and beyond all, learning Torah, finishing a Masechet, and celebrating it. So from that perspective, meat and wine is indeed very, very flimsy. First of all, it's just a minhag until the Sudam of Seket, and this year not at all. Secondly, it could be fixed. How can it be fixed? If we connect spirituality with physicality, then even meat and wine will be lifted.